We are dropping into a kind of time machine for a very intense deep dive. We're looking at the anatomy of love, or at least how the medical establishment defined it back in 1913. The source for this is Bernard S. Tommy's third edition of Love, a treatise on the science of sex attraction. Now, you might think a book on sexuality from the 1910s would just be, pure moralizing, but this was a serious clinical text. It was written for physicians and students of medical jurisprudence. The goal was to give a comprehensive clinical view of sex attraction, pathology, and all its social implications. So our mission today is really to get inside the heads of these doctors. What did they actually consider normal versus pathological at the dawn of the 20th century? And how did they try to use these emerging sciences, anatomy, genetics, psychiatry to build a case for a very, very specific social morality?
What's fascinating here is just the sheer audacity of it. The author's scope is, well, it's enormous. Tommy's trying to cover everything. I mean, from organic evolution and the brand new Mendelian law of inheritance, all the way to these incredibly complex sexual pathologies and a very prescriptive system of eugenics. It's a remarkable document. It really shows how these deeply human drives were desperately being quantified, studied as a hard science.
Right.
And you see that effort to maintain a clinical distance right away. Tommy actually criticizes what he calls the fig leaf modesty and prudery in medicine at the time. So to get around that, he cloaks the material in this very complex, often Latinized medical jargon. It's like he's creating a shield for the reader.
That shield is the first thing that just hits you.
Yeah.
He's so deliberate about keeping the discussion strictly medical, even when he's describing, very common acts. For instance, he uses the term complexus venereus for sexual intercourse.
Right.
Or things like facinum and mentula, just to refer to the male sex organ.
It's a way to sanitize it, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's like he's using the formality of Latin to make it palatable for doctors who might otherwise just blush at the topic. It's an intellectual distance game. He's effectively saying, look, this isn't dirty, it's diagnostic.
Exactly. And he needs that clinical distance because while he's looking forward to science, he's also grounding the power of sex in the most ancient past imaginable. He opens the book by talking about these deep historical roots, suggesting that traces of ancient sex worship were still active in influencing modern attraction.
Which is a wild juxtaposition.
It is. He talks about how sex worship was widespread, festivals for Melita and Aphrodite. And he even cites Herodotus' report that in Babylon, women had to offer themselves once in the temple of Venus before they could marry. It wasn't seen as pathology. It was a societal rite.
So he's using the weight of all this history to basically say, look, this is a primal, powerful force, and then he immediately tries to dissect it with a scalpel.
Precisely. And he ties that reverence to the continued presence of phallicism worship of the phallus and what he calls ionism, the adoration of the vulva, which he describes as the receptacle of life and the Holy of Holies.
And that's where he brings up that incredible detail about the horseshoe.
Yes, that's a genuinely fascinating nugget. He traces the origin of the common lucky horseshoe charm directly back to ancient emblems of the female genitals.
The yoni.
The yoni, exactly. He suggests the shape is similar and that people would draw it over their doors as a powerful amulet to ward off bad luck. It's just a huge shift, from diagnosing gonorrhea to discussing lucky charms. It shows how broad his definition of the science of sex really was.
Okay, so let's make that shift ourselves. Let's go from the spiritual and historical to the purely biological. If he's going to define the science of attraction, he has to define the anatomy of it.
And that's where he goes next. He moves heavily into secondary sexual characteristics, the things that appear after puberty.
He focuses so intensely on differentiation, right?
Very intensely. For men, it's all about function. He says they're built for relative robustness, with sinewy forms, a larger skeleton, a deep voice. It's a very utilitarian description.
But then his description of the female figure, that's where the analysis just pivots completely to aesthetics.
Oh, absolutely. Women are defined by relative gracility, a narrower waist, and hemispheric breasts, which he explicitly labels highly attractive.
And he singles out one anatomical feature as key.
He does. It's the abundance of the paniculus adiposus, which is just the fatty layer.
Right.
He argues this is what creates the figure that is all curves and increases the obliquity of thighs. It's a very clinical way of saying that curves are the biological basis of attraction.
And these physical differences, the sort of anatomical map, leads him straight into the big emerging science of his day, genetics.
Yes. How do these traits get passed on? And more importantly for him, how does pathology get passed on?
So he brings in Mendel.
He applies Mendel's law of segregation, which was still pretty new at the time. For anyone who needs a quick refresher, Ptolemy explains that characteristics are carried by what he calls determiners, which we'd call genes. And they're either dominant, like black eyes, or recessive, like blonde hair.
But the key insight from Mendel, and what Tommy really focuses on, is that genes don't just blend together like paint.
Precisely. He explains that during the ripening of the germ cell, the chromosomes are reduced so that the gamete becomes pure, carrying only one kind of determiner. And that purity is what allows a recessive trait, say hemophilia, to skip generations and then suddenly reappear.
It's a foundational concept, and he immediately weaponizes it for his clinical work.
Right away, he lists all the human conditions he believes are transmitted via this Mendelian inheritance. Night blindness, hemophilia, albinism, and even, he claims, certain forms of insanity.
So the second he defines the mechanism of physical difference, he connects it to the mechanism of human abnormality. So that raises a huge question. If the ideal is defined by biology, curves and robustness, and the inheritance is defined by genetics, where does he put the just vast array of human desires that fall outside that norm?
And that is the perfect transition to pathology, because here's where the treatise gets really intense. He leans heavily on the psychiatric classification system of the time, mostly from Krafft-Ebing. He categorizes abnormality into these 4 buckets, based on timing, absence, intensity, or the object of desire.
The first one, paradoxia, is about timing, specifically sexual activity in infants. He notes seeing complete sexual development as early as the 2nd year of life.
The key notes are, they're intense.
Yeah, a 16-month-old boy and girls engaging in mutual stimulation as young as 7 or 10 years old.
And the cause, according to Ptolemy, it's either a neuropathic predisposition or, this is damning, it's accidental stimulation by stupid servants or ignorant mothers.
A classic move. Classify the phenomenon, then immediately blame the uneducated or, the female influence.
It is. And that blame just continues right into the second category, anesthesia, which is the absence of desire. He says the most common female anomaly is impotence of libido, the failure to orgasm.
This part is wild because the medical text it shifts violently into social criticism.
It really does.
Mm-hmm.
He acknowledges that women in society often profess sexual indifference as a great virtue. But Ptolemy calls this sour, shallow, sexless shrew a fraud.
A fraud.
He argues this indifference is pathological, and that men are easily deceived because they can't physically sense the female climax. It's an incredible moral judgment to embed in a medical diagnosis.
It's a startling observation, though, because he's not just describing a symptom. He's arguing that the societal pressure for women to be chaste is actually creating a pathological condition that he finds morally deceptive.
It really does highlight that struggle between his clinical observation and his sort of moral outrage.
And from absence of desire, he moves to excess.
Hyperesthesia, the abnormal intensity of desire. The focus here is almost entirely on masturbation. He uses this dramatic statistic, claiming 99 out of 100 people have done it, and the 100th is just lying about it.
This section also includes some of his most extreme case notes, doesn't it?
Yes, the documentation gets very graphic. While discussing objects women use for autoeroticism, or feminam di casa, as he puts it, the text mentions various produce items.
So like bananas and cucumbers?
Yes, and he cites a case where he, the author, personally removed a carrot from a young woman's body. This detail, as disturbing as it is, serves his purpose. It underscores the absolute necessity of classifying every single expression of non-procreative desire.
And that classification really hits its climax with the final category, paresthesia, the perversions.
He details these through just unforgettable, extreme examples. Masochism, for instance, the desire for suffering pain or unlimited submission.
And he has that classic case he references.
He does. A patient who visited a prostitute once a week, not for sex, but to be flogged in nudist nates on his naked buttocks until his skin was covered with bloody wheals. That pain alone produced his climax. Then he would just get dressed and leave.
It's a stunning example for him to use to show the complete decoupling of sexual fulfillment from procreation.
And then there's zoorastia, or bestiality.
Mm-hmm.
He notes it's often a vice of necessity for, say, isolated shepherds. But he includes clear cases of pathology.
Like the wealthy man.
The wealthy man who, he writes, gained arousal from the muscular contractions of hens as he killed them during intercourse. It's just grotesque.
And the case of the Mexican woman who trained her burro.
Yes, and claimed to have had regular coitum cum animali 16 times in a single night. These examples aren't there just for shock value. They are deployed as evidence. Evidence that without rigorous societal and medical control, human instinct just spirals into the abnormal.
So, after meticulously classifying all of this, from a 7-year-old child to the man killing hens, what's his solution? This is where he pivots from individual pathology to societal prescription.
He does, and it's not about morality in the way we might think. He argues that the only valid reasons for strict male chastity are public health and the preservation of the race.
He explicitly says there is not the slightest shadow of support in any teachings of physiology or hygiene for the double standard of morality.
But his real focus isn't an abstract moral code, it's disease.
The two big racial reasons he gives for demanding male chastity are syphilis and, even more so, gonorrhea.
He paints gonorrhea as the primary plague destroying women's health. He claims it's responsible for 80% of deaths from inflammatory diseases in women and 75% of all special surgical operations on women, plus high rates of blindness in newborns.
He uses these extreme statistics to just completely destroy the cultural idea that a young man sowing his wild oats is harmless or necessary.
And if we connect that to the bigger picture, this is where the treatise shifts from a moral argument against disease to outright coercive societal control.
Through eugenics.
Yes, Talmy argues that the source of social decay, things like prostitution, isn't economic poverty. He says it's defective mentality. He even cites studies claiming 97% of sexually immoral girls were feeble-minded.
So his conclusion is inescapable from his point of view.
It is. He concludes that the only sure way to fix this is by preventing the breeding of defectives and incompetents, and that includes idiots, epileptics, and what he calls the dull and idle.
And he gets very specific about the mechanics of this exclusion. It can be done by sterilization, which leaves desire intact but ends procreation.
Or by castration, which removes both. The language is chillingly clear. He states that society has a right, nay the duty, to enforce this exclusion, all in the interest of improving the race.
That's the ultimate goal of his entire scientific project, isn't it? Using anatomy, history, genetics, all of it, just to justify this enforced purity.
This treatise, Love, really stands as a monument to the scientific ambition of that era. It sought to use every piece of data available, from the curves of the body to the ancient reference, for the yoni to find normal sex attraction, and then rigorously justify a social framework centered on improving the race.
Yeah, he makes it absolutely explicit. For Talmy, the ultimate standard of morality in nature isn't individual happiness or fulfillment. It's simply what serves that eugenic goal.
Which raises such an important question. Talmy defines morality as the arrest of the instincts by the intellect, and he contrasts that with modern radicals who, he says, preach the fulfillment of every instinct. So after seeing the sheer range of desires that he classified as pathology, from flogging rituals to just a simple failure to climax, it makes you wonder, if intellect is supposed to arrest these instincts, what constitutes a valid higher moral good today? And where do we draw the line between classifying a desire as a harmless variant and a destructive pathology? That is a question that continues to evolve, long after Talmy tried to fix it permanently with his clinical science.
Subscribe for more